Welcome to another Museum FAQ video. I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator at Paul Orselli Workshop here on Long Island, as I'm sure you can tell by my background. and I'm super happy today to be joined by Matt Kirchman. How are you, Matt?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having
Okay.
me today.
Oh, yeah, sure. Always nice to speak with you. And Matt, as I'm sure you know, I always like to give folks, guests here on the videos, a chance to tell us a little bit about their background, sort of how they ended up where they are today. So maybe if you can give us a little bit about your background, and then we will launch into our main conversation.
Yeah, I'll hit a few of the milestones. I guess I would start with my design degree. My college design degree is in visual communication, and so I've always been very, very interested in the way that graphic design, environmental graphic design, has worked in the world. So that's what I set out to do. I was lucky enough to get hired by the John G. Shedd Aquarium in Chicago as an environmental graphic designer during the Oceanarium construction project in the late 80s. That was, even though I had other graphic design jobs prior to that, that's where I really got to work on truly environmental graphic design. And I guess you could say environmental with a capital E, because it was spatial and dimensional and interesting materials like classic environmental graphic design, but it was also about the environment. So it was, we set to interpret the animals in the oceanarium, the coastal Pacific Northwest habitat that those animals lived in, environmental stewardship and responsibility. So it was really a life-changing experience for me. So as part of the team at the Shed, I got to participate in a very team approach of interpretive development and exhibition planning and design. Um, right straight out of the, I would call it the Chicago method, thanks to Janet Kamian, who wrote so much and advocated for a team approach where you pulled people from various departments. So I was pulled from the design department to work on the exhibitions in the oceanarium, and I worked alongside marine biologists and curators, animal husbandry people, um, educators, other designers, habitat designers, audiovisual people, and we together collaborated on the exhibition on the dry scope, we called it, because we were not responsible for the containment of the animals. But so I went to the the what do they call it, the School of Hard Knocks or whatever. I learned the trade that I do now by being just so generously invited and participating in a project like that. I loved it so much that when the project was completed, I said, I want to do this again and again and again. And I felt I want to be our mutual friend, Carol Garfinkel. I want to be in Carol Garfinkel's shoes. I want to be an exhibit developer. And I want to take my design degree and shape it with a little bit more understanding of interpretive methodology and good writing and educational and pedagogy. So I went back to school, got a master's in education, in outdoor education, with an emphasis in interpretation and environmental education. And then I marketed myself. I wanted to work for the National Park Service. I wanted to do exhibition design all across the country about, the wonderful places that this country um, has. And I wound up that didn't pan out, but I during grad school I became an interpretive naturalist at a prairie museum. So I was back in the museum field this time, on the front line, working directly with tour groups and giving guided tours of the prairie. So I honed my interpretive skills while I was doing exhibits at the Prairie Museum as well. I eventually took a position with the Southern California Environmental Education and Leadership Foundation as the assistant director of the outdoor school there, and that kind of gave me, another credential. And then um, design. I wanted to be a designer again. So I kind of flip flopped. That my trajectory would is a
This
zigzag.
guy, this guy can't keep a job.
I
No.
can't. Well, no, I wanted to do. I wanted to do both of those things, but not every job opportunity allowed me to do both of those things. So I kind of zigzagged in and out of environmental education and outdoor education and design, and eventually found the place where those two things would come together again, like they did at the shed. Um, and I found a design firm in Boston, that was doing. Lo and behold, they were on a course doing aquarium design and zoo design and nature center design, and so it was a perfect fit for me. And I brought all of those experiences kind of together, in a really powerful experience at a design firm. So all of a sudden I was a consultant. I became a design consultant to museums and aquariums and zoos, and I did that work for many, many years, um, until I felt like I could do it myself on my own. And that was nearly 20 years ago that I started Object
Yeah.
Idea.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, I know that was a little long-winded, but as I said,
No.
it's a little zigzaggy, and it just emphasizes these kind of this binocular vision that I have for environmental ed, and the necessity for it, and
Well, that's
good design.
that might be a good segue into at least the start of our main part of our conversation, because I think what you described in terms of the zigzag, several times. Um, Obviously, the outdoors came up, but also the sort of synthesis and integration of many different aspects. And it seems to me, as I know you and know your work for a number of years, a common thread might be this notion of a sense of place, whether that's an outdoor sense of place or a historic sense of place. You work on many history projects and historic
Hmm.
place projects. So maybe the way to launch into the conversation, or the conversational ball I can throw to you, is, so what do you think about this notion of a sense of place as it relates to your work and your creative work with museums and cultural institutions?
Yeah, I think most of my projects, most museum projects, I'm sure your clients as well, are after, trying to capture or capitalize on their sense of place. They try and define it, and it is this. It's a complex idea until you really start to think about it and deconstruct it a little bit. It's a nested idea. A gallery can have a sense of place. A museum in its entirety can have a sense of place. A site can have a sense of place. Even a city can have a sense of place. When you think of New Orleans, you can conjure up a sense of place. Or you think of Las Vegas, you can conjure up a
Yeah,
sense of place. Or
Chicago,
Boston. Yeah,
Paris,
yeah,
anywhere.
exactly. And then think about a very, very specific, um, built space, like being under the cover of the Lincoln Memorial, so, just a powerful, dramatic encounter like that. Um, so yeah, I do think a lot about sense of place in the work that I do, and helping my clients either capture that and help visitors articulate what that sense of place is, or acknowledge the sense of place that exists and plug into it in a um, respectful manner. So there are things that I feel um, generate a sense of place. Like if you think of, well, I could think of my own shed aquarium there in Chicago, or the Field Museum, Stanley Hall in Stanley Field Hall at the Field Museum. A sense of grand architectural space, grandeur, a sense of grandeur. So the Grand Canyon, is grand in its name. So grandeur, I think, creates a sense of place. Some kind of profound human expression. I know that you and I have been to the City Museum. It has a powerful sense of place when you not only just encountering the playful experiences there, but learning who's behind it, and they do a good job to share the story of its creation, which actually generates an even more powerful sense of place. Or think of the Milwaukee Art Museum, that has that gorgeous architectural expression from a creative individual. Or I recently worked with the Wharton Esherick Museum in Pennsylvania, a furniture maker who handcrafted every aspect of his home, from the structure to the furniture to the cutting boards and just absolutely to the handles on the silverware, everything made by him out of wood. So just the idea of profound human expression. um, I would also think authenticity comes to mind, even when you're in a place like John Muir Woods, or the among the coastal redwoods. There's a intersection of grandeur and authenticity. A garden under glass, like a conservatory.
Well, it strikes me then that maybe the notion of the term sense of place isn't quite maybe expansive enough or inclusive enough for some of the kinds of things you're talking about. Like if you're in John Muir Woods, or you're in a natural setting where it's not a human impact, but this natural surrounding, the Grand Canyon, is very impactful to you on a personal level, maybe even a spiritual level. So I mean, I'm not sure if sense of place is sufficient. Maybe I don't know if you
Well,
have another term, or another way that you think about it, or an additional way that you think about it.
well, so what you're bringing to light here is, when a place comes to a design consultant and says we want to interpret this place, we have to really think about the intersection of what is given. I would say that the sense of place is kind of what is inherent in the encounter, but the interpretive overlay becomes something. It's a human construct, and that human construct, or that story context. I was working with a few historic properties recently, and we were doing some research around this idea of sense of place. And what about the human aspects? What about the environmental history that humans bring to the table? And we discovered a term called spirit of place, which comes out of the UK, which has that human dimension applied to it. So we started to think about, in the case of, I mentioned the Wharton Esherick Museum, or the House of the Seven Gables, or Emily Dickinson's homestead. What is the spirit of these places? Because there has been human occupancy. Um, there are human stories that overlay the given, either natural or built environment. So,
Yeah, I like that a lot. The notion of spirit of place, because you can go to a place. Oftentimes a historical might think of the Louis Armstrong house in
uh-huh.
Queens and New York City. Or I had the good fortune, it's not open yet, but the Coltrane house, John Coltrane and his wife Alice Coltrane, and I got to walk around the house. And at one point, they brought me into a room, and we were overlooking, actually, a nature area, that in this big picture window, and looking out over this wetlands. And the person who was showing me around said, well, this is the room where John Coltrane wrote A Love Supreme, where he composed A Love Supreme. I was like, wow, you could charge like you could charge musicians to just like stay in this room overnight, or
So,
for because there is a real, the person's not alive,
mhm.
obviously, but there's a sense of like, huh, now I know that composition, A Love Supreme, and I have my ideas about John Coltrane, the musician. But now I'm standing in the place, where he stood out, looking at this sort of beautiful natural area. And this is the place where he composed, arguably one of his
Yeah,
masterworks. And it's like, wow, that's really, I mean, it is a spirited place.
absolutely.
It's not just a
Absolutely.
physical
Yeah.
place. And that, yeah, so
It's
I
not
like
about,
that
yeah, it's
term
not
a
about the
lot.
wallpaper or the furnishings. You could strip out that. As a matter of fact, you could strip out those furnishings.
Well, actually, there's some very colorful shag rugs that are left in different colors from the 1960s that were relate to chakras and Alice
Yeah.
Coltrane. So you wouldn't want to do that in that case, but
Yeah, but think of like, I don't know if you've ever visited Graceland or, these celebrity, places where there's a sense of celebrity encounter.
the jungle room, baby, worth the price of
Totally,
admission
totally.
in
Yeah,
Graceland.
exactly,
You're
exactly.
like, wow, like you're like, yeah, same thing. You go there and you think, huh, like I'm imagining Elvis like kicking back in the jungle room. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, now I need to stop my head from spinning for a second so I can go on with the rest of the
So
tour. So
admittedly, that articulating a spirit of place in words, it's a little bit of a slippery exercise. Um, it's akin to Beverly Sorrell's big idea for exhibitions. You wanna lay it out, subject, an active verb, and a consequence, just like the big idea. You want to capture this spirit of place, at least on the last set of projects that I have done that have had a strong sense of place. So I recently did um, the Welcome and Education Center at Walden Pond. As I mentioned, Emily Dickinson Museum. I'm working with a Pioneer Village here in Salem, and we're trying to really articulate what is the spirit of this place in words, so that much like a big idea serves to organize an exhibition. This spirit of place statement kind of hovers over the project and helps us make decisions, helps guide the interpretive planning or exhibition development process.
well, that actually makes me think of my next question because okay, let's say we've got somebody, several somebodies watching this video, hopefully, at times, and they're like, yeah, sense of place, spirit of place, like yeah, okay, I get that, and I like that, and I'd like to look for those opportunities in the projects I'm working with and the clients I'm working with. So I'm wondering if you have any tips or any approaches, that if you were coming to a brand new project and that this isn't it you that this already is an important part of your working thing, and you think no matter what the project is, I think finding the spirit of the place and
Mhm.
helping visitors find the spirit of the place is going to be important. Like, where would you start as a designer? Like somebody watching this video who wants to inform their own practice and really latch on to that
Yeah.
notion of the spirit of a place. Like, what are you thinking about when you approach a project or when you're in the midst of a project to help tease out that spirit of the place?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the spirit of place, as I mentioned earlier, it's something you want to articulate in words, but I also think it is something that is almost self-generative as you get to know the project more and more. So I'm thinking of a historic house museum project that I worked on where we had multiple defining statements at play. We had a big idea for the exhibits. We had a period of significance that came from the furnishings and historic analysis of the property. So we knew that it was of this time period. We knew that we wanted to have these communication aims as part of the interpretive experience for visitors. So the spirit of place came out as um, an articulation of this is what was going on in this house at the time of the period of significance. And I'll just share. This is from Emily Dickinson's homestead. So we have a poet's home. She has a reputation for being reclusive. People think maybe she never left the house. Um, she's a bit of an odd bird. Um, all these various identities at play, people coming with various assumptions of who Emily Dickinson was and who she is in the popular imagination, because she's alive and well, on Apple TV and in movies and all kinds of things. So
My wife's former high school classmate Cynthia Nixon
there you go. There you
played
go. Yeah, there
played
you
her.
go.
So
So people bring these assumptions to the Emily Dickinson homestead. So the spirit of place that we wanted to project was a place that's actually bustling, bustling with family. With there are neighboring properties. It's actually a very active homestead, um, and Ms. Dickinson is interacting with domestic help, with family members, with people in the town of Amherst. She's actually, although she became a bit reclusive later in her life, during the time period of her poetry generation, which gives her the celebrity status. Um, she's actually a very busy and engaged person. So an engaged person in this place became what the spirit that we wanted to capture.
well, that's interesting. I mean, would you say, like, because what I just took away from what you just said is you're sort of pushing up against people's assumptions, which might not be really good assumptions or the complete story. And so, I mean, is that a deliberate tool to look for those sort of assumptions that people might come to? I mean, like, even I'm just thinking of a physical thing like the Grand Canyon. If I've never been to the Grand Canyon, like, what I know the Grand Canyon, but do I really know the Grand Canyon? I know I might know Emily Dickinson and some of her poetry, but do I really know Emily Dickinson? I mean, that's anyway. That's what struck me
Well,
when you
it's
just
funny you
said
should
that.
say, I hadn't really thought of that, but um, where was I going with this? Oh, um, another spirit of place idea that I encountered through, it wasn't a project of mine, but through researching other sites. Just north of Boston is the Crane Estate. It's a gorgeous mansion, on the North Shore, and palatial. It looks like it belongs in Newport. It's that kind of place, and it's administered by the trustees of reservations here in Massachusetts. And you'd expect to go to the Crane Estate and learn all about opulence and wealth and privilege. And lo and behold, the Cranes, when they resided there, they had these lavish parties on this back lawn that rolls down to the sea. We'll have to put a link with some photos in down below here, so that you can appreciate what this vista is like behind the Crane Estate. This rolling lawn down to the sea, and they would have these croquet parties and banquets and music galas and all this kind of stuff. So the in order to turn that idea of opulence on its ear, the Crane Estate decided, well, there's these parties didn't happen because the Crane family staged their party. Like when you and I have a party, we're slaving at the stove, for quite some time
The Cranes
before
have an army of servants to put on their parties for them.
they had an absolute army of help, of domestic help. And so the idea of interpreting the Crane Estate all through the lens of you are a guest at the Crane Estate, and being a guest is an extraordinary experience, and it takes a whole lot of people in order to welcome you and make you feel comfortable and allow you to have a wonderful time.
Well,
So,
that I was going to say that's interesting. That's sort of like the old Masterpiece Theater British series, Upstairs, Downstairs. You know, where
right, right,
and
right.
I mean that obviously for any big opulent estate or someone who has a huge house, yeah, they're not tending the gardens, they're not cleaning the
That's right.
50 bathrooms or that. They have a phalanx of servants and groundskeepers and cooks and butlers and what have you to
That's
do
right.
that. So
So the idea
yeah,
of hospitality is kind of written into their spirit of place. So it's all about being received as a guest.
but it is interesting because it does again play against people's assumptions or presumptions. I'm going to this fancy house on the North Shore and I'm going to hear all about the rich people who built it and did it, and of course that is part of the story, but that's not the only part of the story. Like
Yeah,
that story can only really work if you have this other part, if you have upstairs and downstairs to make it work.
right, right.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, maybe there's something inherent in finding the spirit in the place, in pushing past people's assumptions,
Yeah,
presumptions to find that spirit of the place.
it is, outwardly and very intentionally, trying to shift a little bit of a mindset or an assumption. So you have to do the work to predict what those assumptions might be, and then intentionally kind of rub up against that, be a little bristly with intent.
Subvert them.
Right. Well,
Well, yeah,
to be
yeah.
provocative. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, well, that's that. I think that's a very meaty takeaway there. That not only this sort of shift from a sense of place to spirit of place, but this idea of okay, how do you become provocative? How do you push past people's assumptions to really help them find a meaningful way to connect with the spirit of the
Yeah.
place and not
Yeah.
just sort of sleepwalking through a tour of yet another fancy rich person's house and like okay, yeah, like you said, oh yeah, this is sort of like the house I saw in Newport or the North
Yeah.
Shore of Long Island or what have you.
And the fact that the term spirit of place comes out of the oh gosh, I can't think of the organization, but
We'll
again,
put it in the links below, as they say.
but it is the the equivalent of the historic trust in the UK. So it is really associated with historic properties. So the idea of what is the equivalent of a spirit of place when you're not working with a historic home or an estate or a built um, a built structure. Um,
Yeah,
so
but if
when you're
you
in a
but it
gallery, how do you capture some sense of place
Well, I
in a
was I
gallery?
was good, just going to go back to you mentioned Muir Woods earlier in the conversation. I mean, I think you certainly could help people connect to the spirit of the place of a completely a noteworthy natural place, the
Mhm.
Grand Canyon, Muir Woods. So that again, it's not just or you even mentioned the Lincoln Memorial. I think about the first time I went to the Lincoln Memorial, Washington, D.C., with my family. And, obviously, as a school kid, I had seen pictures of the Lincoln Memorial on TV or in school
We
books or
all
on the
think we all think we know what
back
it
of a
looks like.
back of a $5
Uh-huh.
bill. But when you are standing there
Yeah.
in front
Yeah.
of that giant statue of Lincoln and you're in this very impressive building and other people are there and you sort of are like, whoa, like this person was, you know, literally they are a giant sized figure in this French sculpture, but there is a very strong sense and spirit of place inside that building that can never, I mean,
Hmm.
you could never capture that even in a virtual reality, holographic, digital, what have you.
Yeah.
You have to be standing there. So um, I just think, in the same way, having been to Muir Woods, also, Muir Woods is like this outdoor cathedral. It's just sort of like,
Yeah.
wow, look at
Yeah.
these gigantic trees and everything that forms this ecosystem here.
So I've been really thinking about what is the equivalent of that spirit of place in something where a sense of place is less inherent, like a gallery in a natural history museum. It's a vanilla box before we populate it with collections and interactive elements and audiovisual projections. And it could, if the building itself doesn't have inherent character, like the like our National Museum, or like the aforementioned Field Museum. There's some architectural character in those buildings, but what if it really is just a vanilla box? And how do we bring in a sense of encounter that is extraordinary and memorable? I think that's really what we are after as exhibit planners, interpretive planners, and designers, is something that is memorable and seats itself in the long-term memory as a special encounter. And I don't hear that word encounter enough in the dialogue. We talk a lot about what are the learning aims, what do we want people to take away, what are the wows, but we sometimes build those we attempt to build those wows out of artificial means. Whereas, I think people, especially, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, especially post pandemic, I think, much the way that people are going to want to return to restaurants and be waited on and have beautiful food brought in front of them. I think people, when we do have a chance to return to the museum buildings, I think the encounter, along with the social aspects of visiting a museum, is what people are going to be craving. They're going to want to see those special things that
I,
museums
Well,
keep.
I agree with that 100%. I think it's also interesting you use the word character, in an architectural sense. But you mentioned the City Museum, and I think when people sometimes describe the original Exploratorium,
Yeah.
they maybe one of the best descriptions I ever heard somebody use about the original Exploratorium was, well, it felt like you had walked into Frank Oppenheimer's workshop and he had just stepped out for a minute. He wasn't
Yep.
there right now.
Yep.
And the same thing, Louis Armstrong House or the City Museum, there really is a sense, even if the person isn't physically there now, there is a sense that there was some human activity and some human decisions. And if you want a character in a different word, like there were some characters who were in this space. So
Hmm.
even if it was the equivalent of a warehouse, there's still something that gives you a sense of this
Well,
human imprint, this back to the spirit again.
and it triggers how you behave and how you set up your own expectations. I'll use the restaurant analogy again. Like, think of going into a restaurant and you see white tablecloths and formally dressed wait staff, and you see crystal glasses, and you see all the silverware matches, and there's soft lighting and there's soft music. You're going to lower your voice. You're going to expect to pay more. You're going to
I'm
expect to
I'm gonna say I must be in the wrong place.
you're going to expect smaller portions. There's going to be a tremendous amount of expectation because your eyes have cast across this environment of this restaurant. And then think of another restaurant where you go in, and the band is rocking on the stage. There are burgers being served in plastic baskets with wax paper liners. You're going to eat off of a plastic fork, and all of a sudden you're going to pay less money. You're going to raise your voice. You're going to let your hair down. You're going to be way more casual. So I think exhibits do exactly the same thing. The built museum environment is exactly the same. Offers the same kind of clues. So when we're when we are designing spaces, we want to capture inherently in the design expression, how do we want people to feel and behave and alter their way of being while they are here. So the classic original um, exploratorium, yeah, you could run as a child. You could run down those steps. You could run the length.
There were
You could
there were exhibit developers walking their dogs and
exactly,
riding a bike.
exactly, and then think of something like really, really. Think of a very formal science center.
Well, or the Louvre.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So all of those things of course we bring into play in order to influence how we want people to feel and what sense of place we want to portray.
Well, I love that you finished by talking about the comparison uh, between restaurants and cultural institutions, because that leaves me an opportunity to say that you've left us good food for thought, and and the time has galloped away from us here, but
Yes, it certainly has. Wow.
I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I think there are some really good takeaways about what I'm now going to characterize, rather than the sense of place, the spirit of the place. And that's a good takeaway for me as I think about my continuing practice. So, Matt, thank you so much for
Sure.
taking the time. I really appreciate it. As we mentioned several times, we will, since we are in YouTube land, we will include links and references to things we included below in the description. So, yeah, Matt, great. This is. I'm sure we will both leave our this conversation thinking about the spirit of places, and if not that, when we will be able to go to a place with a good hamburger that we can
Right.
that
Yeah.
we can enjoy.
Yeah. Well,
So,
thanks, Paul. Thanks for the both the provocation and the opportunity.
yeah,
It's
no,
been
that's
great.
great. Thanks a lot.